It is to appoint a chair. Any nominations? Seconded. Okay. Congratulations. To the vice
All right, welcome to everyone, members of the committee. We now need to appoint a vice chair. And I will move Councillor Ferguson.
Can you do that, sure?
I'm not sure.
Don't make it count.
Councillor Ball, I'll second it, sure.
Yeah, if Councillor Farr comes, maybe.
I can second it. So all in favor? Carried. Opposed? I want to hear anything. Okay then, now changes to the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no changes.
We have a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Ferguson, seconded by Duvall. All in favor? Carried. Are there any declarations of interest? Hearing none. Listen to first meeting, there are no minutes. Now, revocation request. Mr. Nolan is the chair of the Transportation Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities respecting terms of reference of the APS Review Subcommittee. We have a delegation request from Mr. Nolan, who desires to be heard today, respecting the subcommittee's terms of reference. What is the desire of the committee? Moved by Duvall, seconded by Ferguson. All in favor? Carried. That we allow Mr. Nolan to be heard. It would be appropriate then to hear from Mr. Nolan. At this time, Mr. Nolan, would you please address the committee? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming around for everybody is a copy of my discussion. I just ask you to bear with me. So,
It's all good.
the advisory committee, the transportation subcommittee of the advisory committee for persons with disabilities appreciates the opportunity to come and speak to you. This is not new to the members of the committee and not new to members of ACPD, and certainly not new to members of accessible transportation with regard to what we're about to propose here. And basically what we're asking is that this committee consider the recommendation to that the ATS consider the inclusion of a full transportation service review such that first bullet point is that the current shared ride service model be reviewed for replacement and that the city move toward an on-demand service for persons with disabilities. And I don't, unless you want me to go through all of these points or you just want me to speak to them, there's sort of a handful of sections here. The first one is customer complaints. With respect to customer complaints, and I'll just highlight again. You've got the copy in front of you. You can read it. A great deal of the number of complaints upon review of the most recent ATS report for the year ending 2012. And that's December 31st, 2012, centered around things like wait times for being able to book trips. And that's wait times on the phone. So how much time they spend on hold waiting to book a trip. On-board service, so the trip time, how much time a passenger actually spends on board a bus once they're boarded. Some issues related to on-road customer service, telephone customer service, and so on. Another big issue is related to pickup window, the trip window, and so on. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but what's important to understand is that these kinds of issues are all inherent in a shared ride service. And it doesn't matter how much money you put into the shared ride service, it doesn't matter how you try to tweak the shared ride service, these are shared ride service issues and they're not going to go away. And a shared ride service is designed on a model where people have to book in advance. There's no responsiveness to a trip demand, a trip request whatsoever. And so the nature of the shared ride service model is fundamentally flawed, and it will always be flawed, no matter what you do to try and save the day. The second piece related to this is legislative, and of course we have AODA requirements, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act requirements, and those things put a number of restrictions and conditions upon service delivery for persons with disabilities. And so the first thing is, any city or any municipality that provides a conventional transportation service must by default provide a parallel service. Must, period, end of story. And that's also consistent with human rights requirements. The second thing is, there is no requirement as to what that model has to look like. Only that you must provide it. How it's structured, how it's designed is up to the municipality. And the third thing is, there's a number of requirements within the regulation around the provision of taxi licenses for accessible cabs. And fundamentally, the regulations provide that persons with disabilities must be getting equal opportunity to travel on accessible taxis. And so in order to do that, the requirement is that the municipality has to consult persons with disabilities in the establishment of the number of vehicles that need to be on the road in order to provide adequate service. Moving forward to the third bullet, which is the current service. So when we talk about the current service, it's a shared ride service, and I've already highlighted some of the issues with the current service. What is striking? One of the things that is striking about the current service is the number of trips denied. And so when you start to look at the data, and I'm not sure if you have data from the 2012 ATS year-end report, but you look at the number of contacts to book a trip was something in the range of 560,000, I think the number was. Of that 560-odd thousand, there was roughly 130-odd thousand where trips were either no-show, the passenger did not show, the passenger canceled late, or the passenger was denied. And there was, not that this is not a significant number, but in 2012, I believe the number was 16 refusals, and in 2011 it was 3 refusals. So when we talk about the number of trips that were actually requested versus the number of trips that were actually provided, it's significantly different. The second piece is the current service provider is already contracting with taxis to provide both ambulatory and wheelchair accessible DARTS service. So, and of those trips, I think the number was something like 31% of all trips that are provided by the current provider are actually provided using taxi service. And I appreciate and understand it's at a contracted rate. So moving into item number 4 then, what's the benefit of a shared ride service? Well, the first thing is customer complaints virtually go out the window, gone, zilch, zero, nada. They are off the table. So things like trip window disappear because you're not booking a trip until you need it. So you're going to call and say, get a cab to my door. The cab comes to my door, and I get to my door, and bingo, it's a match made in heaven. So all trip window issues disappear. Calls with respect to passenger treatment or passenger requests on the phone when you're calling up to book a trip. I suppose those things might be in place, but generally speaking, people with disabilities are not going to be treated any differently than anybody else because they're using the same service access entry point as everybody else. You call your Blue or you call your Vet's taxi number and you get your trip. The third piece is related to some of the other complaints around trip time or onboard trip time. Those things absolutely go out the window. Snow days. There's no such thing as a snow day anymore. Darts cancels on snow days. I've never seen taxi service cancel on a snow day. So, you know, the only factors that play around not getting trips on snow days is virtually whether a passenger has actually got a cleared walkway to get to and from their vehicle. The last point, and this one I think is the second last point actually, is it better meets the needs of persons with disabilities. People don't have to book their lives a week in advance, and I'm sure you as councillors might be booking your meetings a week in advance, but I guarantee you're not deciding whether or not you're going grocery shopping or whatever else, healthcare appointments and so on. Those things are not being disrupted because of transportation issues. For persons with disabilities, they often are. So, and the last point is, and this is the one that I think is most striking, when you run the numbers clear. It's costing the City of Hamilton right now roughly $32 per trip on darts. Every trip, every single vehicle, it's a roughly $32. The same trip provided on an accessible taxi costs the city roughly $20. So 66% of the cost. So you're going to save fundamentally close to a third of your tax base by running the same service, a better service, a more in-demand service, at roughly 2/3 the cost. On top of that, you don't have the vehicle purchase cost. So I understand from Don, it's roughly $1.2 million per year that the city puts out for vehicle purchases. That $1.2 million is saved right off the top in addition. Plus, when you look at the administrative costs for darts to run their service, it's hard to extract that information from their annual report. I'm putting it up to probably close to $1 million. That $1 million actually goes back into service and running trips. So think about how many trips you could run for $1 million plus another 1.2 if you took those savings from capital and put them into service. You'd be running an extra $2.2 million in service. And I think as councillors, I would not speak for you, but I would think it would be in your better interest, and certainly something you want to achieve, is to make sure that the dollars are going to service and not going to waste. So with that said, I'm happy to entertain any questions and so on.
Thanks, Tim. Before we go to questions, perhaps, Don, would you like to respond to that? And I think ultimately where we should go with this is a referral to staff for a response based on the presentation. Do you feel comfortable with that, though?
We actually brought a presentation today, Mr. Chairman, that would help, I guess, bring further context to some of the issues. And oddly enough, even though Tim and I didn't compare notes, there's a correlation between the two. So
wonderful.
We certainly came prepared to give you a
So way ahead of the curve with you.
I think we could hope for perhaps to give us a more defined scope.
Okay.
Because what Tim is suggesting is really beyond the scope of the direction of the committee. However, it's definitely related, and you may wish to consider a change in scope or a redirection.
Why don't I allow then questions at this point if there are any? If not, then we'll allow Don to proceed with the presentation.
I don't have a question. My only concern is when we set the scope up, it came to us that there was less trips, budget overrun, and more complaints. The committee was struck. And now I hear it may be leading into the taxi industry, which I have a conflict. And so we haven't had any discussion or debate about that, so I haven't declared it because I didn't know Tim was going to raise it today. But just want to caution you, when it starts going that direction, I'm going to have to raise my hand in conflict. And if it's going to involve a lot of discussion on the taxi issue, I probably should resign from the committee because I didn't understand that was part of our scope to look at that.
I don't believe it will, Mr. Chairman.
I won't also. This is just one day delegation, so.
I hear that, but if we're going to go towards taxi scripts and moving the darts to taxis, then I'd have to recluse myself.
Fair enough. So Don, perhaps you can elaborate on that?
Sure. Maybe just by way of introduction, this is Tim's vision. Tim has had this vision for quite some time. In fact, we've been talking about it for a number of years now. And we last, actually, and I wish I'd brought the committee report with me. In January 2011, we reported to committee supporting the concept that Tim, the vision that Tim's promoting. There's really, in my understanding, no precedent for anywhere in Canada, but it's certainly an exciting and interesting concept. The major roadblock, however, was the unavailability of accessible taxis. The initiative couldn't go forward in pilot or permanent form in any way until the issue was resolved around accessible taxis. And Tim is actually better informed than I am with respect to where we're at with accessible taxi, and perhaps can fill the committee in before I do my presentation. Tim, if you don't mind.
Yeah, as I understand it, the city had issued 16 licenses, or put out 16 licenses for accessible cabs. And there had been little to no action on those 16 licenses up until about the middle of June, early June, where 8 of the licenses have been picked up. Now, fundamentally, as I understand it, the licensing department didn't put a great deal of pressure to get those licenses filled until such time that the training modules or the training mechanisms were in place in order to train drivers or owners of those licenses in providing wheelchair service. Jane Lee, through the customer service department, access and customer service, apologize, I don't really know the official name of the department, but had agreed to cover off the cost of providing the training for the drivers. So as soon as those details were determined, then the licensing department started to put out active feelers for licenses. They had agreed to do them in 2 bunches of 8, and by our report in June, 10 of the licenses had actually been picked up and purchased. And so they were going to get into the training, and there was a move to put those accessible vehicles on the road as soon as possible. Our next transportation meeting subcommittee meeting is later this month. I would certainly expect a more comprehensive at that time in terms of where the city is at with those 8 licenses. But as I understand it, as soon as those 8 go on the road, all of the other livery-type vehicles that were being operated by Blue Line presumably will be removed from service.
So, before we go back to Don, Councillor Farr, you have a...
Yep, just to your points earlier, you mentioned the 560 trips with the current service, 130 no-shows, but on that's shared, roughly ballpark 560. Given the current taxi fleet of accessible taxis, and our planning move toward licensing 16, and you're right, we're only about halfway there. Apparently the list of those interested is enough to accommodate the 16, and that's myself talking to the taxi industry. But with that, let's say we accomplish the 16, and what's existing now from the 2 major companies. Is that enough to tackle what would probably be well in excess of 560K annual trips?
Probably not, but you have to remember that, and I would look to George for this statistic, and this is one I don't have off the top of my head, but of all of the passengers in the DART service, which I think is up around 4,500 or something like that, a small proportion actually require wheelchair vehicles.
Good point.
The vast majority of trips are ambulatory passengers. So fundamentally, there's no reason why the ambulatory passengers couldn't be picked up by ambulatory vehicles.
Councillor Farr?
Thank you. Good response. Thank you.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a slide deck here, 22 slides. I can get through it fairly quickly, and it's very brief, and I have to put some context around Tim's presentation. Interestingly enough. Chris is going to answer that. So what we heard while we were waiting for the presentation to roll was a direction from council to essentially repeat the review that was undertaken some years ago. And so we went back to the original terms of reference, as reference was made, undergoing the original terms of reference. And we took from that original terms of reference a more condensed set of possible items for inclusion in terms of reference. We see these as possible relevant actions that community wish or direct us to undertake in order to get out what you're looking for. So we could undertake an analysis of the service delivery model. This is what frankly, when Tim's talking, it's quite entertaining that we're so close and that we didn't talk, is that the service delivery model, we do have some concern with the existing service delivery model in that we're fairly heavily loaded on the DART service with ambulatory trips. It could be matched to a more cost-effective service delivery type, either an accessible taxi or a conventional taxi, just as Tim spoke up. And also complaints. There's no question that the number of complaints has risen, and we've got some data here. It's in the presentation. We'll share that with you. What we could do is perhaps survey some of the key stakeholders. We can undertake some stakeholder consultation as appropriate by the steering committee. We heard during the council discussion and debate is to undertake a review of the current governance models in Canada. We've heard some issues around the technological performance of the software application that's used at DARTS. We have a benchmarking analysis that council's accustomed to seeing with the HSR on an annual basis during our presentation. We've added a bullet here that wasn't previously in, and make reference to, we can do some analysis in terms of the City of Hamilton's implementation of our annual accessibility plan that's headed up by Lee's group. And I think most importantly is how is this program doing relative to council's strategic priorities. This program is specifically mentioned as in council's strategic priorities as a high priority, quite frankly. And one of the possible actions we could take is to measure the program's current performance against council's stated strategic priorities. So we could do any of or all of these actions on your behalf. In terms of service delivery, I think there's at least 3 different interpretations of what service delivery model could be. During the presentation or during the discussion of council, one interpretation was governance and whether or not we have internal, whether this operation continues external and not for profit or comes internal as part of the city program. We've tried RFP to a private for-profit and they really don't generate results, and there's no experience for private for-profit generating higher performance in my knowledge anywhere in Canada. Another would be angle to approach this from would be compliance with the contract between DARTS and City, and look at whether or not DARTS is in compliance with their contractual commitments to council. And the third is a value for money audit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that perhaps later in the presentation. With respect to complaints, I guess some key milestones. First of all, you'll see up there in the asterisk in 2004, the level, by and large, level of complaints triggered a human rights complaint. That turned into a very lengthy and costly human rights proceeding. They ultimately got resolved and implemented. And then the next, if you look at the double asterisk in 2009, that's when DARTS took on responsibility. They approached the city and asked to take on more of the program. So they took on scheduling at that time, and then came back in 2012 and asked again to take on full responsibility for the entire program, with the promise of providing some return on the investment. I think at the time it was mentioned about $300,000 for savings. So I guess there is some cause for concern here when we look at the complaints, when you see the level of complaints that triggered a human rights complaint in 2004. It's a bit of a disturbing trend that doesn't seem to be resolving itself in the foreseeable future. If we look forward into 2013, we were, on the next slide, I guess, 790 complaints year to date at the end of June, which extrapolated to the end of 2013 would result in a higher level of complaints in 2013 and even 2012. To speak to Tim's comments, this is we categorize all the complaints. We won't always agree because sometimes there are a number of contributing factors to a complaint, but I think generally these numbers would be considered accurate. Look at, for example, well, I guess one comment maybe if you look at the caption provided is with respect to 2013 complaints, this was a statement issued by DARTS. Fair harmonization issues, the net result is a complaint directed to the DARTS service in the form of private conduct or reservations conduct. That's not what the complaints bear, frankly, in our view, analysis of the complaints. But you can see pick up and drop off outside the window is the #1 complaint. Under the under the legislation, we're required to pick up and drop off within 30 minutes of the scheduled pickup and drop off time. So when we talk about being outside the window, it's over and above the 30-minute window. So people are either waiting more than 30 minutes to be picked up, or being dropped off more than 30 minutes beyond their scheduled drop-off time. So that's the number one source of complaint. Errors and omissions, you can see 90, and this is one area where I perhaps disagree to some extent with Tim, is that all complaints would not go away. In fact, as we trickle down to the taxi industry, there's an issue with service quality in any municipalities that run very, very high volume of taxis, is to keep consistent operators providing these trips and having those operators trained at an acceptable level of training to the municipality. So the level of complaints is typically higher in the taxi industry because it's more difficult to manage the training because you have more operators providing service and you're changing out more frequency. So on a per capita basis, generally, that's the number one complaint with the taxi industry is getting consistency in service quality, service delivery. Call return wait time. There would still be some call return wait time. If you or I order a taxi, it doesn't always show up when we expect it to show up. So there would still be some area of complaint. But scheduling the onboard time, that goes hand in hand with pickup and drop off outside the window at 89. And so on. So, as Tim mentioned, the overall complaints, the expectation is that they would go down, but they certainly wouldn't be eliminated. Of cause for concern, though, is that some 790 complaints were still trending to even higher complaints in 2013 than we experienced in 2012, and that's cause for concern. I guess the one bar there showing 99 complaints due to staff conduct or service represents about 12.5% of the total complaints. In terms of scope, I mentioned you could have us take a look at, we could undertake a stakeholder consultation. That consultation could be any of the stakeholder groups identified in these bullets. It could be the DARTS clients. We could go to the program. Many of our trips go to the ministry funded program. We could interview or survey the long-term care facilities. We can interview and survey the health agencies and so on. We can get an opinion from the Seniors Advisory Committee or from the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities who Tim is representing, well, it's really Tim's idea, but Tim chairs the Accessibility Committee. So there may be some merit in undertaking a survey of our stakeholders in terms of what their perception is of the service today relative to years gone by. Interesting, this was the results, key goals from our last customer satisfaction survey that was undertaken in 2010. What's interesting is that there's an apparent change in concerns today, and that the complaints about service availability now are overriding concerns that were expressed as little as a couple of years ago. But in fact, to Tim's comments, it's the number one, I think these are prioritized, being placed on a waiting list for trip requests. So Tim's vision would eliminate that. You wouldn't be waiting, it would be an on-demand service. Having to book 1 week in advance, that's pretty standard in the industry to have to book 7 days in advance. And should Tim's vision materialize, then that essentially goes away. Long call wait returns on DARTS. This is a really, really big issue for folks on dialysis who are very, very sick. A very high percentage of our client trips are for dialysis, and often the wait times can be considerable getting home after dialysis. And so people are in pretty rough shape after dialysis, and adding long wait time to that is not a positive thing. The eligibility for DARTS should be expanded to include other types of disabilities. That's complete. That's essentially the new eligibility policy. Taxis are expensive. We need a greater discount on taxi script. Taxi script trips have fallen off because the percentages stayed the same. In terms of split, the city funds 40% of the cost of the trip, but caps the number of coupons, the annual and monthly per purchase, and that's purely a budget issue in terms of that could be opened up as part of the budget process, and the number of taxi script trips would start to rise, and those are cheaper than a DARTS trip and more expensive than a taxi trip. Is that right? Okay. And so that's one option. And then the HSR services, and council's heard quite a lot about the overloading on the HSR services, and that's now become an industry-wide problem where the buses are designed for two wheelchair compartments, and every mid and large system now is experiencing severe issues with overloading of demand exceeding supply for those two stations. And as soon as you put a wheelchair or a scooter in the aisle, then you effectively block off access to pick anyone else up. So that's become an industry-wide problem. Inventory of technology, there's been issues, comments made about the quality of technology. I don't see that as an issue in my view. This technology, the software is the highest used vendor throughout North America, if not the world. It's very sophisticated, very advanced technology. I think there are issues with user capacity and user knowledge of the technology and how to use it, because it is a comprehensive, complex technology, but it is, in our view, comparable or better than any software technology available on the market anywhere in North America. We're in the process of installing mobile data terminals, which will improve the productivity, and the transition to DARTs was to turn the radio system over to DARTs. So I personally wouldn't see technology as an issue in this mandate as we understand it from council. So in terms of benchmarking, if you look at 2008 versus 2011, frankly, DARTS is experiencing pretty good trips per revenue hour. They're well within the industry standard, perhaps even above the industry standard of 2.3 trips per revenue hour. Although that number is not deadly accurate, because it is a combination of taxi scripts, accessible taxi, DARTS trips, taxi scripts. So, but it's a good indicator that DARTS is at or above the industry standard with respect to trips per revenue hour. Revenue cost ratio is something of a concern in that real expenses on the DARTS program are rising. And we do have some concern that those expenses are not related to actual trip delivery, that they're rising in the area of administration. And so the clients aren't seeing the benefit of the additional money, all the additional money that's been put into the program by council. And the other is at the same time of rising expenses that are rising at a higher rate than our comparable municipalities, is declining revenue, and that's directly related to the fair harmonization policy.
Mr. Hall, sorry to interrupt you. On that point, I'm noticing just for the but Windsor seems to be trending a lot better than everyone else. Why is that?
I'm not entirely sure, but we can certainly look into that. Windsor is a not-for-profit, is that true? Contracted, not very small. I think we have how many buses the Windsor have. We don't usually include them because they're so small.
Oh, is that the difference then? Because the per capita trips do speak volumes. When you look at the per capita graph, it's very small compared to ours.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I think
so. Windsor is very small, and so we don't normally include them in our benchmarking because we get so far out.
I was going to say, because that discrepancy needs to be addressed.
It becomes less and less relative as you move farther away from our population.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the trips per capita speak volumes versus how efficient you are in the other ones. So just want that clarification.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Slide number 11. George, please.
Just before we go down, what is the cost revenue? Go back up. Revenue per cost ratio. What's that mean?
That is how much fare box revenue we're taking in divided by the total cost of providing.
Okay, so the fare box brings in 11% in Hamilton?
In the specialized transit program and the conventional program, it brings in about 49–50%. So
What's that 11% mean?
11% is transit program vouchers.
So that's how much the fare box is bringing in the specialized transportation.
That's the net of revenue over expenses. So what happens
So
is,
just so I'm clear on that. So the fare box, what we're charging the fare covers 11% of the cost.
that's correct, and that number is tumbling, quite frankly, for two reasons. Most importantly is extension of the fare parity policy to the DARTS program, so now all of our seniors all of our seniors, 65 or older, will have the Golden Age Pass, and we have the annual Seniors Pass, and most of our clients fall into that category, so our revenue is going to plummet in that area. And it's kind of a double whammy in that our expenses are also rising at the same time.
And because fares are going down, you're going to see more usage of it too.
That's correct, yeah. Or if you change the taxi script cap, for example, on a lot of that.
So those issues of all the relative issues like that need to be really highlighted, because sometimes when you're looking at these graphs, it can lead people, it can misdirect people.
Yeah.
So just so if you can elaborate on those issues, it's really important.
The reason why we provide a lot of benchmarking statistics, because if you take one in isolation and don't cross-tabulate it and coordinate it with other measures, and as you see, you can end up with a very skewed interpretation of what that measure means. So the more measures you provide, the more you can validate your assumptions in terms of the health of the program.
It was difficult to understand what that's trying to tell us. Maybe you could have some kind of percentage of the fare box that covers the cost.
The HSR, for example,
It's 50-50.
it's about 50/50. It's because, and then again, what it comes down to, the HSR trip is about a ninth the cost of a specialized transit trip. So their trip is about $32. The HSR trip is about $230, $240.
Huge. But one is door to door versus not, right? So that's
But more importantly, you're sending an operator, they're often only one person on the bus or two or three or four person on the bus, where on a conventional transit bus, you can have 50, 60, 70 on the bus. So
again,
you're paid for the trip.
And an LRT train carries 300.
Exactly. So the more you can pack on with one driver, the more cost efficiency you get. Because it's really the driver that costs the most, and then the fuel after that. In either case, whether it's specialized transit or conventional transit. What slide are we on, George?
So I love that.
That's what. Might be anyone or what? So we have slide 12.
11.
So cost per revenue hour, it's an indicator of some concern. There's been an increase of 3% over that time period. And that's not all that bad as long as the costs are going into service delivery. But we provide in the next slide a cost per capita that raises the temperature a little bit in terms of how costs are going. And watch on the trips per capita. There comes another cost per capita slide. So trips per capita, you can see that Hamilton is, you would be aware, really provides a much, much higher level of service than most any of our competitors. And that's entirely attributable to the grandfathering of the clients under the previous eligibility policy. Over time, that number will come down as the clients who are currently grandfathered move on. But right now, the cost of specialized transit relative to other municipalities on a capital basis is quite high for that reason.
so the differential between 08 and 11 would be correlated directly with people being deceased or...
Well, there's a number of things happening. You can see on the bottom, their taxi script trips have dropped off quite substantively because the purchasing power has been reduced. They're still capped on a monthly basis, but the taxi rates have gone up. They still are capped on how many they can buy, so they don't get as many trips for the same amount of taxi script. And we're finding the same that's happening in the DARTS program as well. So DARTS dropped from 0.91 to 0.84. Taxi script dropped from 0.38 to 0.28. So the biggest change has been the drop in taxi script trips.
So just to elaborate on the taxi script increase, that differs from that of the meter rate.
Correct.
Yeah.
Taxi script is really subsidizing a taxi trip. People get a chip that's equivalent to money that's worth 40 cents on the dollar, but they're capped at $120 a month. So, next slide there, George. Cost per trip. This is the one that perhaps causes the greatest concern, in that the cost per trip has risen something in the order of about 27% over 2008.
On that point, Mr. Hope, do you have any angle?
We have some suggestions we'd like to take a look at. Yes, and they're in the subsequent slides here.
Okay, great.
This is our biggest concern from a cost efficiency perspective. One is that I think it would be worth having a look at the change in staffing. from the time the city began transferring programs to the DARTS program. There seems to be a fairly substantive increase in staffing, in particular the area of administration where perhaps the client doesn't get the full benefit of the additional money that council is putting into the service. So if they're going forward from here, I think that that's an area that you might want to take a closer look at in terms of, we hope the numbers are accurate here, but are those numbers, first of all, accurate, and is there some rational explanation for the growth in those numbers?
Now, managing the actual contract with DARTS, are we in a position before the expiry date of that contract to negotiate or renegotiate or influence any of these numbers?
No. The influence the city has is the budget. And then beyond the budget, it's the trips. And if the money is going to hire more staff, and not going to delivering trips. So really, council has two points of intervention into the contract.
Okay, so on that point, when they come to us with these overrides on an annual basis, and we see these issues, could we not go back to them and say, listen, you need to deal with these administrative costs and allocate money accordingly so that we won't grant you the overrides?
What the city can do is cap their budget, in which case they would either have to reduce the trips that they contracted to provide or find other efficiencies. But the city would have to push back and say, we're going to compel you to adhere to your contract with the city, which means you've been provided so much budget to provide so many trips. Our expectation is that you'll use that budget to provide the committed trips. And if you don't, then there'll be some form of consequence.
So if we were to then direct them to come in at a certain budget, not affect the rate of trips, they would be forced then to deal with the administrative top-end issue that you're referring to. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
If we specify...
They could cut down the number of trips.
No. If we specify, say, on condition that you do not...
Then staff would report back and say, at the end of the year, say, DARTS is non-compliant with the contracted trips they delivered, and at the same time, they used the budget that ought to have been used to provide those trips, and we'd seek direction from council. And I think that's what's triggered this meeting here today.
I think that's how we can force...
Trips are down and the budget is up, complaints are up, and it's raised a red flag at council, and council wants to come back.
So at the appropriate time, if we have a motion to specifically put conditions that trips are not impacted, but we expect them to meet certain budgetary goals, and they would have to deal with those administrative components, would it be a proper initiative?
Well, we have a suggestion, actually.
Okay.
And it's staff would like to, maybe if I could just finish the presentation.
Yes.
I'll explain why we're going to suggest it.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yes.
I know, is anybody here today from DARTS?
I am from the board.
Okay, but there's no staff people here from DARTS. Mark's out here.
Why is that?
Yeah, because they should be hearing.
Were they invited?
Not invited, but it is an open meeting. And we confirmed in the clerk's office that it's an open meeting.
Did they know about it?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Joey's taping it.
So who, I'm not, there's a lot of faces here I don't recognize.
Okay, so if we can go, perhaps then, if we can just go around the table and everyone can introduce themselves, and we'll start from the left.
I'm Nolan. I'm with the internal audit and the performance audit area.
We've asked audit to be here today.
Yep, and I'm Amy Bodner, also with the Performance Audit Group.
Tim Nolan?
Tim Nolan, yeah.
Jamie Lee, Director of Customer Service Access.
Chris Van Berkel for Accessible Transportation Services.
Roback, PTS.
Don Hall, Director of Transportation.
Debbie Dewey, Legislative Coordinator.
Sam Merulla, Ward 4 Councillor.
Lloyd Ferguson, Lancaster Councillor.
Brian McCaddy, Ward 1. Councillor Farr, Ward 2.
Scott DeVal, Ward 7.
Tim Murphy, I'm with the ACPD.
Bob Sunco, ACPD.
Hold on, what is
Accessibility. The Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities.
Okay.
Bob Sunco, ACPD also. Holly Kilburn, ACBD, and Darts rider who has to leave soon because Darts can't get a ride any other time. How's that?
Okay, noted. Thanks, everyone.
ACPD is a group you're with, Tim?
That's
Tim Chair.
Yeah, Tim Chair, or co-chair with Asden. Not sure. Are you the chair now?
That was coaching.
As the chair of the advisory committee as a whole, they have several subcommittees, and Tim is the chair of the transportation subcommittee.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
all the pleasures.
So Dart's non-service delivery staffing based on these numbers, is a bit of a concern. The other is the fleet makeup, and that goes to what Tim was talking about. Can I ask a question just
Absolutely.
when I look at the numbers between 2007 and 2012, obviously, whatever happened in 2007 and 2012, there must have been an increase in service or an expansion of service. Well, the cause for concern there is the trips have stayed the same or gone down, actually. Okay, because it hasn't been ramped up in response to higher service delivery.
When I look at some of these numbers and I see 11 mechanics in 2007, 5 mechanics, are we contracting these services?
Well, like the HSR, we dramatically improved the life of the fleet, and Darts is currently operating with a fleet age, average fleet age, I think of about 3 years. Most of it under warranty then, because a lot of it's on bumper warranty for a couple of years. So that's entirely within the purview of Darts to adjust their complement, and it appears that they've adjusted the mechanics complement down in response to a newer fleet. But those are numbers that could be verified and validated should council wish to further explore, do some further analysis there as well.
And when I look at 100% increase in basically 5 years of general administration, and yet the complaints went wow.
That's why that's a cause for concern, is that the staffing numbers appear to be going up, so, and if they're going up in the area of administration, the expectation is that client satisfaction would go up, not down. And so it's just an area that we highlight as a candidate for further assessment.
Just so I was going to ask that question quite a while ago, when we looked at the stats on customer complaints. Do you have a breakdown done on, like you said, I think to date for 13, somewhere in the neighborhood there's 400, and we're at or above where we're average. I'm just wondering, of the 400, is that 400 different people? And I ask this question, by the way, in most committees when we get these petitions or other statistics, or is it 350 different people and 50 of the same person complaining in that time period? Do you have a breakdown on that?
We do, and we can't provide it today, but we'll take it as direction to provide it after this meeting.
Okay, any other questions? If not, Mr. Hall, the floor is yours.
A second area of concern, and again, I'm not saying concern with Darts, concern with any overall efficiency and effectiveness is the fleet makeup. And our Darts fleet makeup is, I think, disproportionately high in terms of the dedicated vans, accessible taxis and regular taxis, and that speaks directly to Tim's comments. If you look at Winnipeg, for example, you recall the rapid rating report, when we talked about emulating Winnipeg. Winnipeg is about 50% larger than the city of Hamilton. You can see Winnipeg with a fleet mix of 4 different types of fleet and only 71 total vehicles. Hamilton has 93 total vehicles. Some of that will decline over time as our grandfathered folks move on. But it is a concern in that both our total number of fleet is high, but also the most expensive fleet that we have is high. So one of the things we're going to get into here is that we are providing trips on Darts, as Tim suggests, could be provided by lower cost service providers. That's going to cause a budget bulge if we don't change course. We certainly need to get into accessible taxi, which I think we're going to be, among the first in the province, aren't we, to get into accessible taxi?
No, there's many other municipalities have accessible cabs. I don't know about their relationship with accessible transportation.
Okay,
but there are many municipalities.
They're available on demand without being associated with their accessible transporter. Okay, thanks, Steve. So Don, what is
23 non-accessible cars. What is non-accessible cars?
It's a van that can accommodate a wheelchair, a scooter, oversized.
That's the vet's subcontract that there's...
So they're vans, but they can only take walkers, a passenger that's ambulatory, meaning no mobility device, or a walker.
So then what's accessible? So you're saying that's a van, and you have a accessible van?
We have an accessible van that's being introduced as part of the licensing.
So you can have
Not as part of our service.
You can have an eligible client on darts who meets the criteria, but doesn't need an accessible taxi or a darts vehicle to travel. They have sufficient ambulatory capability to ride in a conventional taxi. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
The door-to-door benefit, though, is what
Right.
the taxi does.
So the next slide is a breakdown of the trips in 2012. And you can see here at the very bottom, darts provided 301,000 trips. 75,000 of those trips roughly are ambulatory, meaning that they could have gone on a lower cost of service provider. But the reality is what darts does, they have 225,000 non-ambulatory trips. To maximize their productivity, they will fill out all available slots with an ambulatory rider to drive their productivity as high as possible. So they're keeping those vehicles as full as possible, as often as possible, to get their productivity up. But there's a loss in efficiency when you do that, because that same trip could have gone to vets. But if that same trip goes to vets and you're still paying the darts driver, you're going to be paying twice. So what Tim is advocating is it's extreme in the notion, but it is that as many trips as possible are offloaded to an accessible taxi or to a regular taxi, thereby reducing the number of darts types of vehicles out there. And once that happens, then infilling with ambulatory trips becomes less and less and less of a problem. And as a result of that, costs will drop over time. So you really want to minimize the number of special purpose vehicles, the darts buses you see, because that's the most expensive service delivery vehicle. One of our biggest causes for concern is the distribution of trips, and staff based their presentation to council with respect to future costs of the program on a very extensive consulting assignment that was undertaken by an American firm, Nelson Nygaard, broadly recognized as perhaps the top firm in North America. And of cause for concern is that our existing breakdown of trips and that on darts is about 57% of all trips are currently being provided by darts, when the Nelson Nygaard, based on Hamilton's demographics, would have darts in a perfect world delivering about 15% of the trips. So every time one of those trips is delivered by the higher cost service provider, that's going to produce a budget bulge. It's going to produce a budget pressure. Trips on taxi at 1%, we like to see that number go up. And then trips on vets, you can see, was at 42% in 2012, when the demographics for the city of Hamilton would indicate that vets could have carried, the lower cost service provider could have carried 84% of those trips. But you only achieve the savings if you have an offsetting reduction in the number of darts vehicles, because if you simply run an empty trip and continue to pay the operator on darts, we're going to pay twice. So just moving the service over to a taxi provider or an accessible taxi provider doesn't achieve the savings unless you have a corresponding reduction in the number of darts vehicles you have.
What's the difference between vets and taxi?
Two different companies.
Vets has a contract with darts.
But they're vans, just normal vans, I think.
They're cars.
So vets is a dedicated service subcontractor to darts, and they only provide specialized trips. Taxi is brokers. Has to have a meter rate.
But it's just a conventional vehicle being used by vets.
The biggest difference is a van. Vets, it's a flat rate versus a meter rate. So darts negotiates a rate per trip. With vets, it's a flat rate.
How many of those vehicles do we have on the road?
Darts.
Vets one's 23, and they're going to increase. Darts is going to increase that subcontract.
So Don,
So if everyone could just go through the chair again. It's a formal meeting, but look professional. We're on camera, Joey's filming us.
It's got your own.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Thanks. So you just said that if you went to Nelson, going by their recommendations. It depends on, you could cost savings by vets, increasing theirs, but you would lose because we have, did I hear you right, too many Dart buses?
Okay, Nelson didn't provide costing. What they provided is a demographic analysis. That the makeup of the city of Hamilton is so many ambulatories, so many people with hearing disabilities, so many people with sight disabilities, and then after we do all that analysis of the demographic, that this number of individuals in the city of Hamilton, some 84% of your eligible ATS clients could ride on other than a DARTS vehicle. And the problem is that only 42% are riding on other than a DARTS vehicle, which the cost differential between the two, multiply that by a few hundred thousand trips, and you're looking at $80 million.
Councilor Bell?
So how do you, I mean, somebody then, it's the way it's going by their recommendation, if that was to follow, we could save a heck of a lot of money, but somebody is running the show and saying, I'm going to justify it.
Well, it's not even so much as the savings, Mr. Chair, is that we've predicated budgets based on that, so we need to achieve these numbers just to make budget. We will come in well over budget going into the future if we don't
Achieve the Nelson numbers.
if we don't achieve the Nelson numbers, if we don't align the client need with the lowest cost service provider.
And how do we get that to happen if somebody's running darts and not using that recommendation service over here?
So that goes to the heart of the issue here. And Tim is presenting one option where, in the extreme, the entire service could conceivably be provided by the taxi industry. They have 440 vehicles out there. We have 70. So Tim's vision is it's a concept, but it's probably a doable vision. If
I asked that because I want to bring it up. I mean, I understand that's the reason why we're here, but also
He's no longer a rookie.
So yes, this goes to the heart of why we're here today in terms of the family of services and aligning the client needs to the lowest cost service provider is something we have to press down more.
Councilor Bell, any further questions?
that's good. Thank you.
Councilor Farr? No, you good?
No, sorry,
Mr. Hall?
So a little bit more elaboration on what the implications of this are if we don't adjust our course. As you can see that on DARTS, for example, there's a lot of numbers up there, but DARTS, whether it's an ambulatory or non-ambulatory trip, the vehicle is the same, the operator is the same, the fuel is the same. So it's roughly about $32 a trip. But on vets, the operators are paid less, and they're at a flat rate regardless of how far they travel. So it doesn't, gas mileage doesn't matter, hourly rate of the operator doesn't matter. You're on a flat rate, they're paid less. So an ambulatory trip is $13.25 relative to DARTS is $32 a trip. And that's not a pick on DARTS. It's for the reason that they negotiate a flat rate with the taxi provider. And the taxi provider's costs are lower. They have a less expensive vehicle, they pay their operators less, and they agree to a flat rate. So so fuel mileage, for example, is irrelevant because they're on a flat rate. So if we don't get some alignment here, we're facing some budget pressures in the order of about $2.5 million. Because the entire premise for our budget presentation to council was based on the demographics that the Nelson and Nygaard report generated for us, which are consistent across North America. So I think we're very near the end. I promised a quick presentation. I haven't necessarily put on that. Council's
as expected. And you were consistent with that.
Council's strategic priorities. I think that everything I do, everything my program does, measures our performance against council's strategic priorities. And we identified three that this initiative would directly relate to. And the first is 1.4, improve the city's transportation system to support multimodal mobility and encourage interregional connections. So that would be develop an integrated multimodal public transportation system. So in a perfect world, the DARTS program would be fully integrated into the city's transportation program. In the same way cycling is now, and pedestrian is, mobility is, all of the transportation programs will be in a single portfolio. But that's in an ideal environment, and we know there are costs associated with getting there. So, but it is a vision statement. 2.1.
Just on that, through you. So in the perfect world, if we went in the other direction to Tim's perfect world, the taxi industry would also need to assimilate.
Yeah, that would be contrary to council's vision, quite frankly, in the same way that currently DARTS being a separate entity is contrary to council's vision. So there has to be a rationale for going contrary to council's vision. And if that rationale exists, then there's no reason why that wouldn't be okay. Because if it serves the better interest of the community, then that's okay. And I guess from my perspective.
Are you okay with that?
No, that's good, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to get...
Implement process to improve services, leverage technology, validate cost effectiveness. So develop and implement a financial sustainability plan. I guess we have an elevated level of concern that we're on a sustainable path right now. And the second is to implement a value for money performance audit program. We'd like to talk more about that. And last is to enhance the customer satisfaction. And this is an area that is in decline right now and is cause for concern. So where do we go from here? Sorry, just to summarize the 22 slides, our interpretation of the concerns is that we're not meeting council's vision of an integrated transportation. And that's okay if the product is better than what an integrated program would give you. Improve services, leverage technology, validate cost effectiveness. The trip distribution is a concern for us in that we're not matching the client's needs to the lowest cost service provider, and that's going to present some pretty significant budget pressures going forward. The fleet makeup is not, the number of full-purpose accessible floor buses is not equitably matched or evenly matched to the client needs. We could in fact operate a number more cars and accessible taxis. Third vertical budget is accessible taxi. We've already talked about that. So third area of concern is develop and implement a financial sustainability plan. We do have some cause for concern that some of the expenditure increase seems to be going up disproportionate to the level of service provided to the clients. And one area to perhaps look at in more depth is the role of the committees to look at the staff complement for the overall ETS program. The decline in revenue we talked about as a result of the fair harmonization policy. And the missed financial performance targets. Transferring out of the full program, reservations and scheduling of the DARTS was done on a promise that costs were going to go down and not up, and the service quality was going to go up. And that hasn't as yet, in our view, materialized. And then enhance customer service satisfaction, and you can see what's happening with complaints. And then something very new to the corporation is implement a value for money performance audit program. We only just recently learned about this ourselves. And if we didn't, I think it's the last person staff there, this is the staff that could contribute to. The final slide is, we recently took a presentation of DMT from the audit division. And in March of 2012, Council approved a 3-year pilot project to conduct value for money audits, and it's administered by the audit administration. Their mandate was to provide an independent and objective examination of the division, program, and activity or process to assure that the goals and objectives of the city to improve economy, efficiency, and effectiveness are being achieved. To assess that the city is obtaining the best value for money, to identify opportunities for continuous improvement. Questions that audit would do, would undertake if they commit to do such an exercise, they'd ask questions like, are the programs, activities, and processes achieving desired objectives? So we pull this right from the terms of reference, so this is publication of the report to council. Are there appropriate measures in place to assess performance? Are resources being utilized in areas of protect? All the kind of stuff that we seem to be talking about. And their deliverables would be to evaluate and improve the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the economy of the operations, look at the present and the future, and compare it to our performance against the corporate strategic plan. So if we go all the way back to the mandate of this committee, we at the staff level looked at this and said, that looks like a pretty good fit for what the committee is trying to achieve here. So we've invited an audit here today. Audit can take whatever questions you want, but going forward, at least from a staff perspective, if you look at whether or not to undertake a governance review or a service delivery review or a value for money review, looking at the terms of reference for this initiative, this seems to be a pretty good fit for what we think council is trying to get from this review.
And any questions? You have, Councilor Ford, you want to go on with this?
No, I have questions.
Yeah, but my question is, typically when there's, and the audit team is probably best to answer this question, when there's allegations made against a specific department, here are some pretty serious ones. Number of complaints are up significantly, administrative staff has doubled, wrong mix of vehicles, lots of pretty serious allegations being made here. Typically, that's handed off to management to provide their comments, and then the audit will then finish the report. Has the DART staff seen this report?
They wouldn't have seen this presentation, no.
Okay. So is this not, from an audit perspective, the right place to start then? Is this data has been collected, summarized, and handed over to management DARTs and let them get their comments?
Councilor Ford, did you want to respond?
Well, just as a board member, I can see to it that they'll watch the stream and give them a copy, which I think is fine.
Absolutely, now that it's a public document, Mr. Chairman.
But it's still a good
Before we
question.
present it to them, provide comments to us, because I'm actually a touch surprised there's no DARTs here today, just to get their reaction to it. But if we're going to do this value for money audit, I assume the audit department is going to be doing it. You would summarize all these issues, which Don's done a great job on today. And once again, it's not a pretty picture they're painting. I'd like to hear management's response to that, to see whether we're missing something.
So the question is to whom?
If the audit
At this point, we aren't committed to doing this. Don has recommended that, you guys consider us looking into this. And Peckrick really needs to decide on what we should be doing. The thing, too, that needs to be considered is we've already presented our audit work plan for this year. It's been approved by council. Our availability based on that, probably we wouldn't be able to start into this until March, April of 2014.
Unless council direction to
Yes, actually, Councilor Ferguson was going where I was going in terms of what are the next steps. And I understand the direction from council is now staff is to draft a report for the committee's signature to go back to council. So one of the possible next steps could be to recommend that audit take on this responsibility, in which cases...
So council would direct them then through Mr.
And they would have to adjust their work plan.
Correct.
But we're also amenable to, we'll follow whatever direction you give us. We could go and talk to DARTs, staff could be directed to do it. We just looked at this and we said, of all the options for going forward, this one seems a good fit for this pilot program.
But yeah, it seems a logical move that we take a motion. I guess we report to which committee? Public Works. Take a recommendation of Public Works that we ask the audit department, because they're independent, to go in and do an audit of the DARTs program as it relates to mix of vehicles, type of service provided, cost why they're so high, why complaints up, why the staff, particularly administrative staff, taking such a and to adjust their work plan and report back to us. Would that be the logical next step?
Well, that's my understanding. My understanding is you would give us direction to write a report and essentially have craft that report for you.
I don't want a report. I want an audit. An audit done.
But then your report would be based on the completed audit, right? Your report would be based on the completed audit and conclusion?
Yes, our direction is to write a report for you to take back to committee. What you choose to recommend, we'll simply draft that on your behalf.
I could compare a committee report with your recommendation.
Like minutes would it be?
Yeah.
And I saw Mr. Chair, I'm looking to comment on this too.
But on this point though, you can move that motion with all the specifics in like
Yeah, that's where I'm going to go. I want more than what I see here.
So I will accept the motion at this point, based on where you want to lead this, and then allow Autumn to, you would like to interject at this point?
Yeah, Autumn's going.
Yeah, we just want to bring a few points to your attention. We are on a 3-year pilot program where at the end of every year, council is going to decide whether or not they want to continue with the program. So there is a...
Can you elaborate on the program?
The value for money audit program.
These are the extra two.
Yeah.
Just for those listening.
Yeah. So there is a possibility that at the end of March of 2014, if council decides not to continue with the value for money audit program, if we are not complete, if we are given this project, if the project is not completed, there is a concern that, like, what happens at that point if our program no longer exists?
Okay, we can cross that bridge when we come to it.
So if you can you put, you have a motion?
Yes,
And
okay, so you have a further point?
yeah, and we just wanted to point out as well that we are not experts by any means in the transportation arena. So the amount of time that would be required for us to gain a full understanding of what's going on and all the various factors involved, it may take more time than what we normally would take for another type of audit. So this audit may take quite a bit.
Can you define what that means?
So for instance, just sitting here today, hearing about all the considerations that are made and all the factors that go into providing the various types of transportation services.
Are you going to suggest that we're going to have to contract this out? Is that where it's heading?
No, but I was just going to say that other individuals with knowledge of this area, like, we're just wondering what other types of resources may be available to us, because we are certainly not subject experts.
Mr. Hall, can you elaborate on that point?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in suggesting that this might be best fit, it's our full expectation that we would commit whatever resources are necessary.
You would want the right.
We wouldn't be lead, audit would be lead. We would give them all, whoever they chose to meet with, the state.
So just to clarify,
we wouldn't be lead.
Right, so just to clarify, you will be the lead agency, and Mr. Hall and HSR will provide the resources accordingly. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that would deal with the expertise questions you have. Are you fine with that?
And we just want to clear, we were only notified of this meeting late Thursday last week, and Ann Peckrick, our director, went on vacation Friday. So before we commit to anything, we need to get her input on this as well, because she is the director of the department. And this type of project would take a lot of resources out of her, under her mandate, so.
I guess the council will direct Ann, and then Ann can respond accordingly. But we don't answer to Ann, Ann answers to us, just to clarify that. So if you move that, and Mr. and Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I'm going to move that we do the question John can seek the answers to, and there's 4 bullets here. And I'd like to add, I don't know who knows these other slowly. A mix of vehicles, correct?
John?
Why have complaints gone up? And why have staffs increased so significantly and service levels gone down?
Okay, so if we can...
Those would be the 7 bullets.
Okay, so moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Farr.
No, I didn't second it. I just want to speak to it.
Oh, you did second. Moved by, seconded by Councillor Hall.
I'll second it, but I also want to ask a question.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we do that, can we just, again, just for sake of clarification, moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Hall, the motion is to have staff audit the 7 items that you just mentioned. Can you repeat those items just for the...
Okay, so there's 4 of them that are on the slide number 22. Questions of office and answers to. Okay. The other 3 I've added, because I find it interesting that Don says we have the wrong mix of vehicles. When you look at other municipalities, we tend to show that. So are the mix of vehicles correct? You know, why are we taking ambulatory patients or ambulatory customers on the buses, on large buses? Why have complaints gone up? That's what I want to know as an elected person. What's the reasons for that? And I think DARTS may have a whole different answer to that, and I'd like to know what their answer is. Under management comments, a typical audit. And why have staff increased so significantly? That's what
Okay, so those questions are pretty clear to you, Mr. Hall?
So fleet, mix, complaints, staffing, and I take staffing mean other than the bus operator.
Administrative member, that's one stuff. Yeah, those are the 3 key points you tried to make, wasn't it, Don, in your presentation?
There's actually a 4th point, given Tim's delegation today. Did you want to include
I think we should.
some assessment or analysis on
I think
I can't move that, though.
Oh, okay.
Well, we'll move that separately, moved by Farr and seconded by Duval, that we will respond to Mr. Nolan's issues at people over time. So if Ida can take that note down, and we'll leave this
I'll
separate.
just leave that separate motion, I'll declare my conflict and let you put it up.
That's probably a great idea.
On
Councilor Duval, you have
Councilor
the
Ferguson's motion that I seconded, you mentioned comments, and I agree with him, we want to find out why the complaints are up. But I don't think just from the management, I think we have to learn this also from the frontline workers. Okay, there seems to be a difference here of who's running the show, and there's some waste going somewhere else, and it just seems to be a mass confusion.
Now, Don, how can we go about differentiating the opinions of that of management versus that of the front line?
Well, if we go back to the activities list, Mr. Chairman, what you might want to take advantage of is some form of stakeholder consultation. Whether we provide a very large number of trips to ministry programs, to hospital programs, for dialysis, those kinds of things. So part of
Which there's no reason to question. Councilor Duval, would you like to bring that forward as a separate motion, or would you like the friendly amendment to Councilor Ferguson?
Councilor, so
you could have stakeholder consultation.
So say one stakeholder consultation.
That's right.
Okay, so just to clarify, so you're with us right now?
The last bullet was that.
Councilor Duval would like to have stakeholder consultation based on what, okay, Mr. Duval, I'll just tell the call.
Yeah, I can just take us into slide number 6 if you would, Mr. Chairman. We've listed the stakeholders, and that would be a helpful inventory to give us some direction in terms of which of those stakeholders do you think you want us to.
So I think that actually with DART staff, because it makes reference to all of them. Yeah, there's you basically to all these
Okay, so all inclusive at this point.
Yes.
And Councilor Ferguson, you accept that as a friendly amendment? Okay. So moved by Ferguson, and then Councilor Farr, you have a question?
Yes, I think Mr. Chairman was looking to...
That last bullet is part of Councilor Ferguson's motion, whether there should be an audit of the stakeholders, or to answer the question of whether we should have stakeholders.
That there will be a stakeholder consultation of the process.
Okay.
And
For clarification, Mr. Chairman, I heard DART staff. Any of the other stakeholders on this list? Was that?
I think they've emphasized all inclusive. So all stakeholders.
So I think certainly management under an audit review is the one that has formally comment. But I think I heard Councilor Duval say that we also have consultation with the directors. Speak with the frontline people.
Okay. So he's saying all inclusive, but primarily the motivation behind this is to get the frontline view on it. Okay. So, Madam Clerk, we're all good with that? Could you read back the motion just for clarification purposes?
That the audit staff be directed to consult to an audit to answer questions. Are programs, activities, or processes achieving desired objectives? Are there appropriate measures in place to assess performance? Are resources being utilized to their greatest productive capacity? Are there opportunities to achieve objectives at a lower cost or increased revenue? Is the mix of vehicles correct? Why have the complaints increased? Why have staff increased but the services decreased? And also that there be a stakeholder consultation of the process, including all stakeholders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Amy pointed out, this is fairly new news to audit, and the sense is that Council may well choose to direct them to adjust your work plan. And any thoughts on whether or not, if that doesn't materialize, what Plan B might be. Staff is prepared to do this, but the preference of staff is to remain neutral and
At this point, I
transparent.
think it is a priority of this committee, and I know it's a priority of council. So how staff will respond accordingly to ensure that it's completed is entirely subject to the decision of council. So at this point, we're not going to worry ourselves about that component.
We'll track that with Chris Murray. He's got to sign the doors.
Okay, one at a time. We'll direct it accordingly, and then we'll go accordingly. Let's be formal, let's be fair. You've been here now 7 years. You should know 7. Close to it. So, having said that, that's moved by Ferguson, seconded by Duval. All in favor?
I'd like to speak.
Councillor Farr, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a few comments. First of all, as the lone representative of the Darts Board, I feel it incumbent upon me to just say a few words. I'm a proud member of the Darts Board. I wish I could get to more meetings. I know Councillor Whitehead and I, feel pretty strongly about, the work that we've done, and we've been doing it for a couple of years now. So it's important that I get on record to say that there is a representative here from Darts today, and that's the board member. In myself. And I'm glad to be on this ATS committee, and I think I'm the only one here that's been on this committee since the start of the term as well. We just don't meet. And this is the first meeting that I've been aware of ATS. So I'm glad we are here today. We're here for important reasons. The motion before us is fair enough, but certainly something that I feel strongly that we probably could have had. I don't know why we didn't. I still don't quite understand why our executive director or other members of staff are not in the room. That said, I feel a comfort level as a board member for Darts and not on ATS that we've accomplished enough here today, and we've addressed that enough here today to know that they'll be part of the process. They're going to be consulted with if we move forward with recommendations here with respect to the audit specifically. And certainly, as I've already noted on record, I'll be certain to make them aware that there's an opportunity to watch and review in its entirety this meeting through Joe's live stream, and of course with Heidi's great work as always as a clerk. So I just wanted to get that on the record. Also to our audit staff, thank you very much for attending. It's clear you're in the spotlight now, but Amy, to put your mind at ease, I don't know how often you get to our committee meetings, probably more or less audit and finance committee meeting. There's a process before this is ever ratified, and Ann surely will be back by vacation in that time. So we'll be sure, and I wanted to get it on record, that you did a great job here in this meeting, and your comments were important to us, knowing that you couldn't make any commitments, and you made that clear to us. We understand that, and I think our chairman clearly laid out the process so that Ann will understand that as well. I have a little bit of apprehensions here and there, Mr. Chairman, as it relates to being this proud member of the Darts Board. Don and I have had many, many talks about this, but we're talking, there's a lot of people making a fairly good living driving Darts vehicles, 120, 30, something like that. Unionized employees, they're not making as much as HSR drivers, but they're making a heck of a lot more than probably most taxi drivers. So where this wraps up in the end, I'm very hopeful, and we'll have these conversations on the Darts sides too, that we're going to be cognizant of that throughout this entire process. That said, an audit never scares me, and it shouldn't here today as a member, again, speaking as a member of the Darts Board. So I have absolutely no issue, and I would expect that our executive director and our management on the Darts side would have no issue. And they're up for the challenge to answer any questions any auditor, whether it's internal or external, will have as to the capabilities and the efforts made with this organization, and for at least as long as I've been a part of it. But I would most definitely support all of the recommendations before us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. So on the motion, moved by Ferguson, seconded by Duval. All in favor?
Carried.
Carried. Anyone opposed? Hearing none. We do need to move forward on a couple of Councillor Duval has a separate motion on an item surrounding, what was the issue, Councillor Duval? I can't recall the text. An analysis of Tim Nolan's proposal. That's right. So that's moved by Duval, seconded by Farr.
Do you know the conflict?
With a declared interest to avoid a conflict from Councillor Ferguson. All in favor?
Carried.
Carried.
Good work, Tim.
Okay, now, we do need to receive Mr. Nolan's presentation, which I don't believe we've done. So that's moved by Ferguson, all in favor?
Carried.
Carried.
Move to receive 8-1.
Now, before we do that, 1 second, we need to discuss the terms of reference, which we haven't done. So next we have before us the draft terms of reference. Is there any discussion on this? You have it before you. If not, may I have a motion on the terms of reference as amended?
Yeah.
Madam Clerk.
So do we put a date, since the motion is to have audit staff do an audit, do we put a date for termination or no?
No, I think we leave it open-ended.
Leave it open-ended.
So on that, as amended, moved by Farr, seconded by Ferguson, all in favor? Carried. Now, we've heard from Mr. Nolan, there aren't any further delegations. Presentation's been complete. We need to receive staff's presentation.
Move to receive.
Moved by Ferguson, seconded by Farr, all in favor? Carried. Now on 8.1, we have correspondence from Peter Hassan.
Move to receive.
That's moved by Farr, seconded by Duval, all in favor?
Carried.
Carried. Now, we have a motion to adjourn, moved by Ferguson, seconded by Farr. Madam Clerk.
And just one more motion for the vice chair, because we didn't have.
Oh, definitely. So,
Councilor Ferguson.
and seconded by Duval, all in favor?
Carried.
Carried. Motion to adjourn, moved by Ferguson, seconded by Farr, all in favor?
Carried.
Thank you very much.